So 2022 is basically wrapped up for Siege Esports at this point. We finish up with the open qualifiers for the Six Invitational this week, and then we get a fat holiday break before doing the closed qualifiers in January and the Invitational itself in February. But what lies beyond that wasn't known to the wider public until yesterday, when Ubisoft dropped a couple of updates about how the Siege ecosystem is going to work in 2023 and beyond. And honestly, from where I sit, some of what's coming looks fantastic. The current closed regional system that's been the Siege standard since SI 2020 was a contract that was only planned to last out for 3 years with a reevaluation period after that. And now Ubisoft is making some adjustments based on community and organizational feedback and some of their own planning to expand it a lot further than where it's been into lots of different corners of the world. I think most of it's good. Some of it's definitely intriguing, but for the most part, good. But I figured we should do a video talking about everything happening in next year and beyond, and we're gonna use a good, meh, bad meter that is entirely based on my own take. At some point, esports just jaded me enough that I basically feel 40, so I think my opinions are finally valid now. Now, before we even get into the news, I just want to highlight that we got this info drop without having to wait on SI for it. This is good. We are so accustomed to only getting super important information like once every 3 months, so Ubi dropping this in December is honestly super relieving from a communication standpoint. It's not a ton of info, and admittedly, it probably could have been condensed down into an email. Like, it leaves me with like a whole bunch of other questions because there's still plenty of things that aren't fleshed out, like the intricacies of exactly what they've announced, how it's all going to work, where I'm going to fit into that picture, and so on. But they gave a general outline, and it's something that can start generating hype now, as opposed to us only learning about how the new system is going to work like a couple of weeks before it starts. The first big thing is that it's not just 4 main leagues anymore. It's 9. This is also good. North America and Europe are going to remain the same, but LATAM is getting split between Brazil and Hispanic Latin America. You know what that means?
It means that the Copa Elite 6 is dead! Finally!
We killed it, and it's about time. Brazil finally gets split off into its own league, and it's not tied down by a broader Latin American system, and both Mexico and South America are getting absorbed into one bigger league. APAC North is being split between Korea and Japan, APAC South is getting split between Asia and the Oceanic leagues, and the Middle East and North Africa finally gets recognized as its own Tier 1 regional system. This means that all 9 regions will have guaranteed representation at majors in the coming years, rather than having a hyper-convoluted path through different sub-regional qualifiers. It's going to start to develop talent in a lot of these countries a lot more than it's already been developed, both because these leagues are now going to have a lot more Tier 1 teams per region, and it will also allow them to test their might against the existing international juggernauts and develop them more thoroughly that way. However, it is unlikely that any of the teams from these new leagues, so to speak, are going to immediately find success. LATAM and APAC both had some catching up to do when they first got it added to Pro League from years ago, and you can argue that APAC still has a lot of catching up to do, but for most of these new leagues like MENA, Asia, the new LATAM, these regions are probably going to get slapped around a lot until they can find their footing and actually prove that they can hang with the teams that are currently at the top of the world. But even if they do get slapped around, they are still getting guaranteed major spots, which is good for the regions, but might be meh for the quality of games for a while. There will be a lot of good teams from established regions who won't make majors in the next couple of years because the slots that they usually had in majors previously are probably going to be less in order to make way for teams from these new regions. And it will probably be argued that those that are left out of qualifying for the majors are probably going to be better than the teams from these new leagues for at least a little while. It's going to be that way for a little bit as these newer regions get their bearings. Not to say that the majors themselves won't still be entertaining or exciting or interesting, but the quality of play is going to change if we are allowing smaller regions equal chances against these Goliath names that we've had in the space for a while. It's part of the growing pains of allowing these guys to actually have some legitimate chances to develop on international big stages, so just deal with it. It's good for them, but it might mean that event quality does tank just by a little bit. Now, for all 9 regional leagues, these are closed, and they won't have promotion or relegation opportunities. This is meh. These were arguably the most fun storylines that we had every year, watching these Challenger League teams grind in CL for a year and then go on to face these Tier 1 teams that very clearly weren't up to the task to stay competitive at that level. We've had a lot of teams and a lot of really good players born from this system, some of which are now world champions, but it's gone. The main leagues are closed, and the teams that are in them will only be playing against each other for spots at majors. What this is Ubi trying to protect the organizations that make these really big investments into the scene, especially at a Tier 1 level, by preventing them from suddenly losing their spots unless they decide to drop out, which is honestly a sensible approach because you have to find a way to balance it out a little bit, but it also leaves a lot of people wondering if this is technically franchising. Technically, it's not, but keeping partner organizations in the league without risk of suddenly being cast out if their team performs badly enough is important to long-term stability. For the league, for the org, for the whole ecosystem as a whole, it's an important thing for everybody, so Ubisoft can't necessarily overlook that just to add promotions and relegations back in. That said, Ubi isn't casting T2 out altogether. They reinforced that grassroots are important, but they didn't really say anything about how that's going to work next year. It's entirely possible that there's not like a dedicated Challenger League anymore, but majors are now getting open qualifiers that anybody can compete in. This is the first time that we're having these for majors since Raleigh in 2019. This is good, but it still kind of feels weird if this is the only way that teams below a Tier 1 level will actually have competition in anything substantial. So I still have a big question mark on this. I've been a huge advocate of a robust path to pro and Tier 2 system for years, and I don't want my friends and my colleagues in Challenger League to not have talent work or opportunities anymore. The teams and the crews deserve a lot for the work that they've put in at a grassroots level for Rainbow Six, so hopefully more actually comes out of this with time. For the teams that did win their respective CL or T2 leagues this year, they're getting two benefits instead of relegations: a big advantage in their region's SI quals this year and a fast pass through major quals for the start of next year. This is good as far as consolation prizes go because CL teams need incentives to stay together and keep competing in this new system for next year, but we'll see if it actually ends up being enough to keep these teams around or if they just end up disbanding in a few months anyway. As one example of this, Reality TV is the team that won North American Challenger League in 2022, and they got put past the BO1 open portion of both of the SI open qualifiers and then just got put straight into the best of threes. They lost the first qual, but then won the second qual, so now they're effectively going to closed. That's half of the advantage that they won. The other half is going to come for when majors actually start kicking off next year. Speaking of majors, there's now 2 of them a year, and they're way longer, and they will have more teams with a play-in stage. This is very good. We're going from 4 marquee events per year to 3, and we're expanding the majors, so hopefully they become a bigger achievement to win with even more international representation. You'll qualify for them by doing well enough in your Tier 1 league or by winning the open qualifier that your league has to get there. Now, I know the concept of a play-in stage might be really confusing to most people in Siege because I don't really think we've ever had this before. It's essentially a stage before the group stage where a smaller number of teams fight to go to groups. There will be some teams that auto-qualify for groups without needing to go through play-ins, and some teams will need to use play-ins to get to groups. Exactly how it's distributed and what teams go to groups and which ones have to be in play-ins is unknown for right now, but there's a few different ways that you can do it. I think the current best example of this is the MSI or World System for League of Legends. They have 12 teams auto-qual for groups and another 12 in play-ins fighting for 4 final group spots. A region like China, for example, has 3 guaranteed spots in groups for the best performing teams of that split, but then also has 1 spot in play-ins for a team that does well, but just not as well as the other 3. And there are similar systems in place for regions like Korea, Europe, and NA. Some regions, however, aren't big regions with a lot of international contenders, so they only get spots in play-ins with no groups contenders. These are regions like Oceania, Japan, Brazil, and Mexico. They're still a part of the tournament, but they have to make it through play-ins to get to groups, which is where a lot of people say most of the action is. For Siege, I think something like this is the best option because the other way to do it would be having 1 team per region minimum auto-qualify for groups, which might actually mean that a lot less of the top worthwhile teams in the world actually get into the events where they would stand a better chance against less developed regions. It might sound complicated, again, because I know this isn't a thing that's really been in Siege before for any premier tournament, but once we get more info on exactly who qualifies where and we get a Wikipedia page for it, it will just become the standard for the way that we do majors in Siege. We'll do it twice a year, and that'll just be that. This means that majors will technically have the capacity to be bigger than 16 teams, and I think with play-ins, that will definitely be the case, but Ubisoft just hasn't specified exactly how many it'll be yet. The Six Invitational, by contrast, is still going to be a 20-team affair, but all 20 teams will be qualifying via global standings points and not through last chance qualifiers. Yeah, this means SI quals are dead. I think this is bad. I personally don't like the idea of removing the chance for currently hot teams to qualify for a world championship. Ubisoft's logic on this is that spots at SI should be reserved for only the most consistent teams throughout the course of a given season, but 2 out of the last 3 world champions got to the event by winning their last chance qualifier and then went on to win the whole thing. And in both of those cases, it was like cases of them not being that good at the beginning of a year, but then being great closer to the end. Space Station didn't sign Canadian until the 2019 season was almost over with when they made their run, and TSM had a very up and down 2021 before getting to SI and then became a massive surprise factor for everybody. To me, it seems like it deprives the teams that really light up at the end of the year the ability to see if what they've put together is sustainable in a much bigger environment. I can understand wanting to keep SI spots reserved for only the teams that do really well all year, but I will guarantee you now there will be at minimum 1 team, if not more, that are going to SI next year that were really, really good at the beginning of a year and that are going to disappoint all of us by how far they've slid since when they were good. Plus, it also deprives us of other storylines of just how teams have managed to get to the biggest dance of the year. And for as much as Ubi talked about wanting exciting storylines in their announcement, this seems a little bit antithetical to that ideology. However, what it does do, admittedly, is make SI spots a lot more coveted and enhances the value of earning one throughout a season, which is also something that Ubisoft touched on. Quote, "The point system will now be particularly rewarding for teams showing recurrent performance at international events. So if you were to go to more than 1 major, you get a bonus." This is good. Sounds logical, and I honestly really don't know why we didn't have this before. The timeline for this year also looks like this, by the way. Stage, major, off-season break, stage, major, off-season break, SI. Those big breaks in the summer and the winter are good, but for multiple reasons. Most prominently, to give all players the chance to actually take a dedicated respite between stages and plan vacations and stuff. The system for the last few years seemed like it was really stifling given how much players talked about it on Twitter, so it's a big deal for Ubi to recognize that they need to prioritize their mental health. That's a big up, so thank you to Ubisoft for acknowledging that. But it is also leaving tons of space for minor events to come back. They specifically said that the off-season creates room for third-party tournaments. This is very good. I'll tell you right now that there's probably a 0% chance that we are going to go this entire 3-month off-season period without there being some other kind of smaller event. Maybe even international ones with like a different assortment of teams from the major or something. There's tons of possibilities for these and lots of different tournament organizers who are probably involved since Ubisoft released their tournament licensing tool last year. So if the calendar looks a little bit blank now, I full-on guarantee you that we'll see some cool smaller events taking up that space. Don't worry. And the last thing that got announced today, probably one of my favorite things revealed in a long time. We have a new Tier 1 tournament organizer. Say hello to Blast.
Oh no! Oh! They announced it!
Blast! There's not that many things that really get me to react that way, but just for context, these are the same guys that also run productions like this. Now, just to be clear, there isn't any expectation that they're going to go all out like this for Siege events, but from everything that I've seen from the productions that they run in Counter-Strike and Fortnite, they pour so much into the productions that they work on. One can certainly hope that Ubi will allow them to go nuts on anything that they run this year. which, by the way, is basically everything. According to the blog post, Blast are working on production and regional program structure with Ubisoft in every region except for Japan, who will continue to be run by the X-Moment company that currently runs the Japan League, which actually seems like they do pretty well with it from everything I've watched from them. But Blast is going to be handling everything else. We worked with ESL in the first several years of Siege, and then Face It in a couple of other companies since 2020, and apparently now it's being done by Blast. A couple of details here. This is not an exclusivity thing. Ubisoft are still the owners and the primary managers of the Siege esports ecosystem, even if Blast is being added in as a partner. I bet Ubi will probably still be pretty hands-on with the whole program like they've been in the past, but it's not like they're just handing the reins off to a different company. Blast now has a huge chunk of the tournament organization and its production strategy. Other tournament organizers can still do stuff in Siege, especially for the minor events over the summer and the winter periods, and there may be some bumps in the road transitioning things to Blast. If you remember back when Face It came in 2020, there were a lot of things that needed to get smoothed out over time, and it could be a very similar situation in 2023, so if it's not perfect at the start, patience is definitely recommended. Though one thing I will say about this is we're basically going to have to start over with having a new company come in like this. Like, it's a very exciting prospect to be working with new partners, but I very much hope that a lot of the people who've been in Siege for a long time also get hired to work in this new saga of Siege. Whether they worked for Face It or ESL or whoever in the past, there are tons of incredible people who have been on our crews putting this stuff together over the years, and I really, really hope Blast will be considerate enough to at least give some of those people opportunities to continue their craft under a slightly different banner. The guys that I worked with on the NAL, SI, and Berlin especially oftentimes busted their balls for broadcast and admin stuff in more ways than the public will ever truly understand. So if anybody from Blast ends up seeing this, hit me up. I've got a list of people I want to see work with us again for years and years to come. So, just to recap, 9 regions, 2 stages and 2 majors, leagues are closed to relegations, majors have play-ins with open quals, big summer and winter breaks, minors over the off-season, no more SI quals, CL winners get some advantages, Blast is the new organizational partner, and we didn't have to wait until SI to hear about all of this. That's basically it. I still have tons of questions heading into 2023, like league formats and start dates, or what minor events we're getting over the summer, or Tier 1 league partnership rules, qualifier and major changes, English broadcast talent opportunities, event locations, etc. Tons of other stuff. But I do appreciate how this was something Ubisoft thought to at least give us some advance notice on so that we can start generating hype for the season beyond SI next year. I hope this answered most of the questions you might have had about how all this is going to work. But like everything else in Siege, we're just going to have to keep on playing the waiting game to get the really intricate details that we're looking for. It is very nice to have a general outline, though. And as far as I'm concerned, there's very, very good reasons to be excited about next year. But enough from me. What is your favorite change coming for next year? Are you especially excited for something, or does anything in particular worry you? Let me know in the comments and hit up my Twitter, and my Twitch, and this YouTube channel for more in the coming days, please and thank you. And thanks a lot for tuning in for the SI Open Quals for the last 2 weeks, by the way. Well, it was a lot of fun doing that again, and a lot of fun getting back into streaming. So, yeah, I'll see you later.